If you love painting watercolor florals, but they just never look right, today's tutorial is for you. Today I'm sharing an in-depth lesson on how to create more depth, detail, and movement in your watercolor flowers. Hey friends, welcome back. My name is Shayda Campbell. Thanks for hanging out with me again this week. I'm really excited about today's video because I think so many of us are coming back to watercolor after some time away, or you're just getting into it, and it is so common to find it very frustrating that your flowers don't look like mine, or they just don't look right, is something I hear quite often. So today I want to take you on this journey, this real-time painting we're going to tackle together, and as we paint these rather pretty and simple flowers, we're going to talk about how to sort of angle your flowers so they're not just like facing your viewer dead on, how to create that sense of depth and perspective, how to add shading and detail, get a nice movement and flow to your composition and make your flowers look lively. And all of that we're going to do in just half an hour, where it's all in real time. I'm going to walk you through every step. And if that doesn't sound good enough, I think it sounds amazing, there's also a worksheet. So you can head over to patreon.com/Shayda Campbell, get the worksheet. It's only $3 a month to join my Patreon, or $33 for an entire year. You get a month free when you sign up for a year. Or if you're not into subscriptions, you can just buy the worksheet. It's like $6 or something. So just as a one-off. Head over there, check that out if you want the extra guidance. But with that said, let's just paint some flowers together. Great, so pull up a chair at my desk here. I've got everything laid out. I'm using Arch's cold press today. 140 pound means that the paper is thick enough that I don't need to stretch it and it's not gonna warp and buckle. This is an 8x10 block, and I just like having that little bit of extra texture that the cold press gives, but you know I do love my hot press paper. I'm working with a number 8 long round brush. All of my favorite supplies are linked in the video description. And that's a great way to just subtly support this channel by shopping those Amazon links. And of course you get all of the exact same supplies that I'm using, which I think can be comforting. So I'm mixing up a really light pink. You can see I've kind of got a darker pink on the palette already. I started by just grabbing a bit of white, just a hint of red, hint of raw sienna. We're sort of going for like a really light pinky peach. Lots of water in there as well. What we're going to talk about today is how to shape flowers and leaves to create depth, and also how to layer your watercolors to create that depth. So it's kind of twofold. But what I want to say right now, and the most important thing that you need to hear, is just that you want to start really, really light, because you're going to add many multiple layers. So you don't want to start too dark. It's very hard to go backwards with watercolor. You got to start light, get darker from there. What am I saying? Let's put some paint on the page here. We're going to start by painting the first flower kind of right in the middle of the page. That is extremely light, and that's good. And you lighten your watercolors by just adding water to the paint, but you can also add white if you like. That's your choice. And I start with kind of the middle petal, and then I put one more petal, one to the left, one to the right. And then once you've got those 3, you're going to kind of complete the circle just like that, a little sweeping. And you might have a little bit of negative space right in the center. That's fine. You know, you don't want it, the shape, I find I don't want to be too perfect. So I kind of make things a little messy, and that, you know, mess those petals up a little, make them look a little more natural. And that's that. That's great. Let's do another one. Maybe we'll add just a hint more pink into there. And for this one, I'm going to start with that curving petal, the one that just goes like that. It's just like a little C curve. And then I'm going to do those 3 other longer petals. Again, really perfectly imperfect. I don't want them to be too smooth. I want them to be a little, like the shape to be a little weird, a little wonky, as I love to say. There we go. I think that looks good. And let's place one more here. We'll do one like right over here. This one we will start with the left-hand petal. and then that center petal, and then the right hand petal. So there are our 3 longer petals, and then we just kind of complete the curve, making it the flower kind of like a bowl shape, almost as if you're trying to paint a bowl that's sitting on an angle, and you can see the side, but you can also see the inner bowl, if that makes sense. Kind of. Okay, let's mess it up a little. I added a bit of water. There we go. I don't want it to be too perfect. And I'm going to let these start to dry. So let's rinse our brush, and I'm going to make some green paint here. Let me see, I'm going to grab a little bit of sap green, and I'm going to mix it with Van Dyke Brown. So it's gives this very earthy, almost dead green. If you only have like a really bright, say like just like a true green in your palette, something like a malachite green or something, you can always darken it and deepen it and deaden the color by adding a little hint of brown, or you can always add a bit of red, because red is opposite green on the color wheel, and so it cancels it out. So it muddies it. That's a good way to think of it. It muddies it. And let me pick up a little bit of my favorite green, which is deep phthalo green. And I just need to add a whole lot of water to this as well, because same idea here, we don't want to start too dark with our leaves, because we're going to build up lots and lots of color. So blot that brush on the paper towel. You have the most control over your paint when you're very aware of how much paint is in the brush and you don't have too much paint in your brush. Too much paint and you lose control. Whoops, I didn't mean to touch that. That's okay. We'll just use a dry brush. Let's just go like that, and then you can always kind of erase by picking up pigment with a dry brush or a clean brush. There we go. Anyway, that's fine. What am I doing? I'm just trying to make kind of a nice stem that goes through the flowers and has like a nice, gentle, natural curve to it. Oops, I didn't really mean to touch that there either. That's okay though. We'll get a nice blending of the pink and the green, and we're going to add a lot more pigment anyways, so that's okay. We will live. I'm going to do a big messy leaf shape over here. You can see I just run the brush across the paper and kind of see what shape I get, and I don't want it to be too perfect either. Might add a little bit more water to that. And we're going to add another leaf shape up here. This one you can see is very watery, and I like that. And we'll just put a little stem there as well. And I definitely need some leaves over here. So why don't we do some leaves that are on a bit of an angle? There's one that's very thin, showing that you're not really seeing the entire leaf, like it's angled. And we'll do another angled one there. There we go. I like the way that looks. And I like the stem kind of running through the middle. It gives a nice movement to our piece. We'll add a little bit of a stem up here with some little leaves kind of peeking out. Same thing here. We're going to have a bit of a sepal, a bit of a leaf at the base of this guy. It's really just a bit of a messy splotch, but I think it's going to work. And then, what else should we do? Maybe one more. Let's connect you, and maybe one leaf that kind of faces down towards the bottom of the page. Since these guys are angled, we'll have this one angling down towards us. And then I think I'd like to add maybe, I don't need a lot more. Maybe one up here. It's not too big. Grab a little bit more paint. I didn't have quite enough paint in the brush. And there. That looks good, I think. And this could continue and maybe kind of wrap around this top flower, giving the whole piece like a nice movement and symmetry. It all works, and it's got a nice A nice flow is the word that I'm searching for. A nice flow. Everything kind of looks like it grew that way naturally, which is obviously what we want with flowers. And we'll add one more over here too. You get a leaf and you get a leaf. There. It doesn't have to be huge. Okay, I'm happy with how that's looking. And you can see the leaves are still quite wet, so we need to let them dry just a little bit. While they are wet, that's a good time to reshape and refine the shape is how I usually say it. Like if you just thought, oh, this guy just needs to be a little bit longer or more jagged, now is the time to do that while the pigment is still wet. And you can always add a little bit more pigment as well, like what I'm doing here. Just go in with that darker, slightly darker green, and I like to put a little bit at the base of the leaf and the tip of the leaf. That's just a nice way to begin shading. Really, these are quite wet still, so I don't want to add a lot of pigment because I just have no control over it. You can see it just whoosh, kind of explodes. So let's just leave them alone, let them dry. How are these guys feeling? They're still a little wet, but that might be a good thing. We do need them to dry a bit. What I want to do is take a second. Now you can see some of my green mistakes where the pigment touched. I've gotten a little too much, so let's do some erasing. I just wet this brush and I'm using a clean, damp brush to just pick up a bit of pigment so that I don't get like too much green sitting under my pink. Actually, a little bit of green will help with my shading and will help with the nice, I like that kind of loose watercolor where colors flow into one another, but I don't want too much green. So there, I've picked up a bit of the pigment. I'm going to put that brush back and say that that's good enough, that's fine. And then what I want to do here is make sure that I've got a clean brush and I can come over here and grab a slightly darker pink. So this is the same sort of blend of raw sienna, a little bit of red, a little bit of white, and even a little bit of red brown. So what I'll do is I'll pick it up and I'll mix it into this pink over here. Maybe add a little hint more red so I can see exactly what kind of color I'm working with. And then to create this sense of these flowers being on an angle, that's the whole goal here. First thing we're going to do is paint that bottom petal a lot darker. So we just follow that same curve that we laid out for that initial petal. Do it up here as well. That kind of curved petal, that front petal, it's going to be a lot darker. And I like the way that looks. And I want to do the same one here. I'm going to lighten it ever so slightly so they're not all the exact same color. There we go. And that just gives you that kind of front of the flower. It is going to be a darker color, a different color, and it might look a little funny right now. And that one I just want to back it off a little. But it is going to work and it's going to make these really pretty dynamic flowers. And it's a simple enough way to do it. Having a couple different sort of areas of pink on the palette, you'll also find quite helpful because for this next part, we're going to take a little bit of paint just on the tip of the brush, blot it so you have control, you don't have too much pigment in there. And we're just going to add some little jaggedy lines and brush marks to the tips of these petals. And then maybe blot the brush and just do a splotch on one or two of the petals. There, I'll put a splotch of that light color right in the center of that middle petal. And then same thing up here. I want to kind of start almost illustrating the petals. Like I could draw the line of the petal and then do some little quick linear brush strokes. And again, kind of almost outlining the petal. Let's do another one. Some tiny little curved brush strokes there near the center. And then we're almost outlining that larger petal there. And you can see how the flowers are really coming to life, and we've achieved a beautiful amount of depth, and we've done that by creating the shape and then layering color. And as we layer the color, we continue to highlight and maintain that same shape that we started with. So paint a few of these, do the same practice, maybe try different colors or different angles for the flowers, and you'll get so good at this so fast. It really is so much fun to paint flowers like this. And the nice thing here is that in this practice, we've done one that's curving up and out, one that's kind of curving down. So you've got a good basis here, and just switch up the color and the size and change the angle ever so slightly, and you're gonna get good at this fast. There we go. Just you can even just do some little dots sometimes. That helps with the shading and the coloring of the flower, the coloration. This guy's still a little wet, so I need to be careful that I don't just, you know, put the darker color and it just whoosh, explodes into that wet area. What that will do is it'll make that whole flower much darker than I want it to be, and then I'll have to go even darker to create more shading and detail, and I definitely don't want that, because I want these flowers to look, you know, like a light pink when all is said and done. So we started extremely light, and then we've got this kind of medium peach here, and we're going to continue to build and build on that. Now, one thing I should do is grab a little bit of yellow, and this is a mix of raw sienna and a little bit of red brown, bit of water, and we're just gonna take a nice light watery yellow, and we're just gonna make a messy splotch or two, brush mark at the center of these flowers. There we go, messy brush mark. If it blends in with some of that peach, that's not a bad thing. And this guy's still quite wet, and I actually think that'll be good. He's gonna need some more shading, so he will end up being our darkest flower, and that is okay. That's okay with me. I'm not mad at that. There we go, maybe a few dots, random dots, and I think that looks good. Now what I want to do is let those continue to dry, because they are a little too wet to work with. If I try to add any more detail, I'm not going to have any control over that pigment. But these guys are much drier. So let's get some darker green. I'm going to start with green gray, which is a nice earthy green. Nothing wrong with that color just on its own. I'm going to put like a little hint of indigo in there to darken it. And let's just see how that looks. What I want to do is kind of do the same thing I already showed you, which is to put a little hint of that darker pigment at the base and at the tip. This is just a good simple recipe for leaves that look good every time. There are so many ways to vary this and change it. This is not like, oh, every time you paint a leaf, you gotta do this. But it's just a great sort of like, I'm learning to paint. I want these leaves to look natural and lifelike. This is a great way to get there fast. So there we go. Maybe we start to add some little veining lines, like something like that. A few little detail lines can go a long way. Let's give you, I'm just kind of guiding that pigment out with the tip of my brush. That's why a round brush is so good, right? Because this big belly, this part here, is holding on to tons of pigment. And then this tiny little tip is so delicate and fine that it allows us, you know, to really get quite detailed and do small detailed things without having to change brushes or really even reach for more paint. I don't have to go back to the palette that often, which is nice. Okay, let's paint the sort of bottom of this leaf a little darker. Gives a nice shading to that guy. Same thing over here. We will say this is when we're sort of thinking about light source, and our light is coming from above, and that's your choice as the artist. You get to decide where is the light coming from, and our light is coming from sort of above and directly on, which means that we're going to have darker areas down towards the bottom. Okay. And you know what, if you kind of know where your light source is and things don't go perfectly, that's okay too. Like really this guy should be the lightest, and because of some of the paint getting away from me, you know, he's probably going to be the darkest. Well, I'm not going to like give up on the painting over that, you know? So that's where I'm at. Okay, I think that's looking good. We've kind of darkened leaves a little more on the bottom side. Yeah, I like the way this is looking, and I'm gonna, some of these I like to just muss up a little with a wet brush. That's never a bad idea. And yeah. Okay, looking good. Now what we want to do is continue to add detail and help with the depth, so detail and shading. And for me, the best way to do that is just to continue to layer, but I do want it to be pretty much dry. When you're putting wet on dry, when you're using a wet on dry technique, which is just what it sounds like, wet paint on top of dry pigment or paper, that's when you have the most control. So that's when you can be so wonderfully precise. So let's pick up a little tiny bit of that darker pink. And if this guy is dry, then I can do, you know, these really thin, delicate little lines, and they're not going to move at all. They're not going anywhere. I could, you know, get quite illustrative, and I know that the pigment is going to stay right where I placed it. Whereas right here, it's a little wet. So what happens? The lines soften and blur, and that can be really beautiful. You know, we use that a lot in watercolor painting, that softening, that blurring. We can use it to work for us. Like right now, this guy is wet down here. So what can I do? I can put some of that darker pink, and it just blends and bleeds out so beautifully that I get this really, really natural shading. Let's see if this guy is still dry. I mean, wet. Yes, he is, which is good because I want the shadow to look quite soft and natural. There we go. And that's helping a lot with creating a flower that looks like it is blooming up and out. And then over here, are you still wet? Not too wet, which is good, because I really need to recreate that shaped front petal because I kind of lost it. So what do I need if I'm creating a shape? I need it to be dry so that I can be very precise. Okay. Sorry guys, my phone cut out for a sec there, but all I was doing was adding like a whole bunch more little lines just to give that, you know, using the precision of wet on dry to really give the flowers some more detail. And I'm liking where that goes. And I was also using that wet into wet, you know, to give me that beautiful softness in the shading and the shadows where I needed it. So you're using those two things in combination to your benefit. And if all of this is sounding a little like, what? You're going too fast, or what is wet into wet, wet on dry? What are all these techniques? I do have a couple of e-courses. You can head to ShaydaCampbellCourses.com and check them out. I've got a beginner level watercolor course where you're going to learn about the color wheel and what different paper types there are and why you would use one and not the other. So all of the stuff that we don't always have the time to get into on YouTube is contained within that course. And it's a course I'm very proud of. And then the other watercolor course is something that I call Beyond Beginner. The course is called Flower Power. And you know, there's so much beginner level content out there online. And of course there is, because there's always going to be a larger beginner market, a market to purchase your course. But my DMs are flooded with really good questions and questions that tell me that you are beyond beginner. Many of you are sort of hunting and really desiring content that goes beyond the basics. And it can be really hard to deliver that in a YouTube video. So Flower Power is my love letter to you. And we tackle more abstract concepts, like trying to find your own unique artistic style. And we just paint a whole lot of flowers. So you come out of it feeling like you've really got a handle on all the many flowers that you desire to paint. So that's really what we're doing here, just painting flowers. And I know you guys love painting florals just as much as I do. It's so relaxing. The forms of flowers I really love because you can make them up, you can play with them, or you can look at real flowers and get very realistic. You know, it's totally up to you whether you want to invent or you want to be very precise and realistic. And speaking of precise, this guy needs a stem. He should have something that like joins him to the rest of the flowers. So let's add that in there. I kind of just like to make a bit of a blurry mess especially when there's a bunch of stuff that's close together, like there. We don't actually have to do much. And I think that looks good. And maybe I'll add a little green there as well, the tip of a leaf or whatnot. Okay, that's looking good. All I want to do now is add a little bit of detail to the centers of these flowers. Picking up a little bit of raw sienna mixed with a little bit of red brown. Ooh, that was a lot of red brown. That's okay. Let's just blot the brush, and then I'm just going to do some dots sort of around the perimeter of that yellow area. I think that looks really good. And then a few thin lines, you know, kind of going out and connecting to those dots and splotches and brush marks. And I like the sort of this stamen look that gives me. So dots around the perimeter of the yellow, a few lines going out towards the dots, and that works. And then a few dots in a semicircle, perimeter of the yellow. Doesn't have to follow the perimeter exactly. And just brush marks, loose brush marks, and then a few little lines connecting some of those dots. This guy probably needs a few more lines there. And of course, you don't really see the center of the flower, the stamen, beyond that front petal. So that's why we have done the dots in a little semicircle. I like the way that looks. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. Just wanted to add a little bit of brown to some of these leaves. And then I think I just need to work on the shape of the front petal ever so slightly. Like it has to look I think the petals that are sort of beside that front petal need to look as though they are somewhat shaded as well. So I'm just adding a little extra shading like right here, there. And I like the way that is looking. There we go. And I think, you know, I've talked about this on the channel a lot. I never know when to walk away. I just keep painting and painting. And then when I watch the video back, when I'm editing the footage, I'm like, oh my gosh, you should have just stopped 20 minutes ago. You went on far too long. So let's just, and I tend to overwork my paintings. And by overwork, I mean, they just start to look a little muddled, I guess you would say, and just not as fresh. Like I've just done too much. How else can I say it? So there we go. I'm going to leave this alone and just say that is the end of this one. Maybe a little bit more brown in the center of that guy. And a little dark. Yeah. Okay, I'm done. I'm going to stop. Let's put a little signature down here, just hidden under this leaf. SC. There we go. She's all done and I'm quite pleased with that. This was just a great simple practice exercise to show how effective these simple techniques can be when it comes to trying to capture flow and movement and depth and perspective in your flowers, and basically just how to paint some angled flowers so that all your flowers aren't like this flat, dead, sort of boring, almost cartoon-like flower. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I had a lot of fun painting this today. Be sure to head over to patreon.com/Shayda Campbell to get your worksheet. The worksheet will help you through this idea of painting flowers on a bit of an angle. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you soon.